He was a shadow in his own land, a wounded Apache named Talon Cross, bleeding out in the high canyons of the Dragoon Mountains. He had prayed for a sign for medicine for rain, but what stumbled into his refuge was a golden mare, breath heavy with a saddle built for a lady. The mare was a death sentence, a link to the world that wanted him dead. But when Talon saw the V brand on her flank, his heart stopped. He knew this horse. It belonged to Clara Steele, the only white woman he'd ever seen, who looked to him like the first light of dawn. The pain was a living thing, a searing coal lodged in Talon's side. He lay pressed against the cool, shaded granite of a shallow cave, his world reduced to the throb of his blood and the buzzing of flies. 3 days. 3 days since the ambush. Talon, a proud Apache warrior, had been tracking a mountain lion that strayed too close to his people's hidden camp only to ride straight into a posse of white men. They weren't soldiers. They were worse. They were ranchers led by a man whose face twisted with a special kind of hate, a man named Jeb Pierce. They opened fire without a word. Talon's pony went down, and the first bullet tore through the muscle of his left side just above his hip. It was a gouge, not a mortal wound, but it was deep and it bled fiercely. He scrambled into the rocks, the labyrinth of boulders and cliffs he knew like the back of his hand, and escaped. But he was wounded, dismounted, and a long way from safety. This small overhang, hidden by ancient trailing yucca, was his sanctuary. He packed the wound with a poultice of yarrow and bound it with a strip of his own shirt. The fever came and went in waves, bringing blurred visions of his younger brother dead now for 2 winters. He had no food, and his canteen was down to its last warm, metallic-tasting sip. He was a warrior prepared to die, but he would not make it easy. He would die here in the land of his ancestors, not in the dusty street of a white man's town. On the 4th morning the fever broke, leaving him weak but clear-headed. The desert was silent, broken only by the distant call of a raven. Then he heard it. It wasn't the sound of men. It was the clumsy, stumbling sound of an exhausted animal. Talon pulled his knife. His rifle had been lost with his pony, and he pressed himself deeper into the shadows. His body screamed in protest as he moved. He peered through the yucca fronds, his dark eyes narrowing. A horse. It wasn't a wiry Apache pony or a tough Mustang. This was a settler's horse, a high-quality mare, a pale shimmering palomino with a mane and tail like spun white silk. Her coat was matted with sweat and dirt, and she was favoring her right foreleg. A beautiful creature. She had wandered into his hidden canyon, drawn by the same tiny spring-fed seep that was keeping Talon alive. The horse dipped her head and drank greedily, her sides heaving. Talon's first instinct was to kill her. A horse this fine would be missed. Men would come looking for her. She was a beacon, a signal fire that would bring his death straight to his doorstep. His knife hand tensed. But as the mare drank her fill, she lifted her head, her terror-filled eyes scanning the rocks. She wasn't just tired, she was terrified, and she was hurt. He saw the dark, chafed skin of a rope burn around her neck. Someone had tried to steal her, and she had fought them. He stayed perfectly still. The horse, sensing something, pricked her ears. She whinnied a low, desperate sound. It wasn't a challenge. It was a plea. Slowly, his body aching with every inch. Talon eased himself out from behind the yucca. The mare's eyes widened. She tensed, ready to bolt, but her injured leg buckled. She stumbled and let out a soft sigh of defeat. "Easy, little sister," Talon whispered, using the Apache words of comfort. He didn't move toward her, but sat down heavily on a rock, showing her his empty hands, his knife now tucked away. He sat there for an hour watching her, and she watched him. He saw the V brand on her flank, the V-bar V, the Vance homestead. A cold dread, sharper than his pain, settled over him. He knew that brand. He knew the Vance homestead, a modest ranch nestled in the valley, east of Purity Creek, and he knew who this horse belonged to. He had seen her only 3 times. The first time in Purity Creek she had been buying flour. He had stood in the shadows of the alley by the general store, an outcast in his own land, watching. A drunk prospector had kicked a stray dog, and she had turned her face, flushing with anger. She had walked over to the man, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You will not do that again." The man, stunned by her audacity, had just gaped. She had then bent down, spoken softly to the dog, and bought it a strip of jerky from the store. The second time he'd seen her riding this very mare, fast as the wind, her face alive with a joy that seemed to carve a hole in his chest. The third time she had been placing wildflowers on a new grave in the town cemetery. Her father, John Vance, had always been the man she admired most, and now she was Clara Steele. To Talon, secluded and always on the watch, she was the one bright light in a world scarred by dust and violence. She was the woman of his dreams, a dream filled with kindness, courage, and a world untouched by bloodshed. And this was her horse. Everything changed when he realized that. The horse was no longer a threat. It was a message. And if she was without her horse, lost and hurt, then she was in grave danger. Talon grunted to himself, standing up, ignoring the burning pain in his side. "The Creator ain't done with me yet," he murmured. He walked toward the mare, who watched him but didn't move. "We're both too wounded." "Little sister," he muttered softly, his hand gently touching her golden sweat-soaked neck. "Let us heal, and then we'll find out who did this to you. And to me." The canyon that served as Talon's refuge was a thin, deep scar in the rock, unseen for more than 100 yards. Its only entrance was a narrow bottleneck, and at its end, a small seat provided just enough water for one man, and as it turned out, one horse. Talon had named the mare Sundance in his mind for her pale golden coat that seemed to drink in the light. His first task was tending to her. Her foreleg was strained, not broken, and the rope burn on her neck was raw and infected, while Sundance grazed on the sparse, hardy grass in the canyon. Talon did what his grandfather had taught him. He built a small smokeless fire using dry mesquite wood in the deepest part of his cave, where the smoke was filtered by the rocks and brush. He boiled water in his small canteen cup, steeped creosote bush leaves, and let it cool. Then he took a strip of cloth from his saddlebag, the one he'd saved from his dead pony, and gently cleaned the raw weeping wound on her neck. Sundance flinched, her skin quivering, but she didn't pull away. Her large, intelligent eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of fear and more trust. "It's poisoned, and they didn't just use rope," Talon murmured. His voice was low, a rumbling growl. "They don't know how to care for a fine animal. They only know how to break." For the next few days, Talon and Sundance fell into a slow, painful rhythm. He cared for her, and then he tended to himself. His own wound wasn't healing well. The fever still clung to him, swirling at the edges of his vision. He knew it was infected, but he forced his stiff leg to obey. He made a half-day's journey up the canyon's side. He knew this land well, knew it like the palm of his hand. He searched for what he needed, a cluster of prickly pear cactus. He used his knife to cut away the spines and harvested the thick green pods. Returning to his camp, he roasted them lightly in the embers to soften them and split them open, applying the warm, sticky gel directly to his wound. It was an old Apache remedy, one that drew out the sickness. Talon lay in a fever haze for another day, the world blurring into pain and shadow, with Sundance standing silently at the entrance of his cave, a quiet sentinel occasionally nudging him with her soft nose to check if he was still alive. On the third day of their shared recovery, Talon felt the fever finally recede. The fiery pain in his side had turned into a dull, manageable ache. He sat up, his head clear for the first time in a week. Sundance, seeing him move, came over and nuzzled his shoulder. Talon smiled, a rare and rusty thing. "You're a good nurse, little sister." His strength was returning, and with it his curiosity. He had taken the saddle from her back, cleaned it, and oiled the stiff leather. It was fine work, the name J.D. Vance tooled into the cantle. but it was the small pouch tied to the saddle horn that caught his eye. It wasn't a money belt, it was small, soft deerskin, clearly handmade. He opened it. Inside was no gold or silver. Instead, he found a single, perfectly pressed desert marigold, a small worn piece of blue turquoise, and a tiny carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb. Talon held the bird in his calloused palm. It was simple, carved from willow, but the detail was precise. It was a sparrow. He ran his thumb over it. This wasn't the property of some frivolous woman. This was a treasure bag, a collection of small, powerful things. It confirmed everything Talon had sensed about her. She saw beauty in small, simple things. He carefully returned the items and tied the pouch closed. This was something private. His thoughts turned to the danger. He couldn't stay here. He was getting stronger, but he was still vulnerable. He had to know where she was. He left Sundance in the safety of the canyon, blocking the entrance with a heavy fall of brush. "I'll return," he promised her. "Don't make a sound." He moved like smoke, climbing the rocks to the canyon's rim, heading east toward the Vance homestead, staying high on the ground. It took him half the day. Talon lay on a ridge, gazing down at the small ranch house and barn. The place was eerily quiet. No smoke rose from the chimney. The corral was empty save for a single old mule. Then his eyes narrowed. Tracks. At least 5, maybe 6 riders. They'd ridden hard. Their horses had been shot. They hadn't just come to visit. They'd torn the place apart. Talon could see the front door of the house, hanging open, a window shattered. A cold, hard fury surged up his throat. This was Jeb Pierce's doing. He was certain of it. Jeb had been trying to buy the steel place for a year, coveting its steady creak. Clara's father, Zane, had always refused. Now that Zane was gone, Jeb was making his move on the daughter. They had likely come to scare her off, to run her off the land. And Sundance, they must have tried to take her, and the mare in her panic had broken free and run. Just as Clara herself might have. Or worse. Talon scanned the homestead, his eyes missing nothing. He saw a smaller set of tracks, women's boots leading away from the house. But they were scuffed, dragged. She hadn't run. She'd been taken. No. He looked again, more closely. The tracks led away from the house. But they weren't hurried. They were measured. She hadn't fled in a panic. She had left after the men had gone. She had run. But she had run on her own. He found her trail leading away, not toward Purity Creek, but into the rough country. She was hiding, but where he found something else. A single spent .44 caliber cartridge, glinting in the dust near the corral. It wasn't his. It was theirs. But near the barn, half hidden under a water trough, he saw a flash of color, a blue ribbon, one he had seen in her hair. She had dropped it. But it wasn't just dropped. It had been placed. It was a sign. But for whom? Talon looked at the tracks again. The men's tracks were fresh, maybe a day old. They had come, done their damage, and left riding back toward Purity Creek. Clara's tracks followed theirs. She was alive. She had escaped them. He went back to the house. Every sense screamed. He slipped inside. The place was a wreck. Chairs overturned. Flour and sugar spilled on the floor. A woman's private space violated. On the floor he saw a small framed picture of a smiling woman. Clara's mother, he presumed. The glass had been shattered by a booted foot. The rage rose again, hot and clean. This wasn't a robbery. This was an act of terror. He knew with certainty, that chilled him, that Jeb's men would be back. They had done this to frighten her. And when she didn't break, they would return to finish the job. And he, Talon, a wounded Apache, was the only one who knew. He returned to his canyon as the sun set the sky, bleeding purple and orange. Sundance gave a soft whinny of welcome. Talon stood by the mare, stroking her neck, his mind in a whirl. He couldn't just ride away, and he couldn't just return the horse. If he and Apache rode into Purity Creek, He'd be met with a rope, blamed for the very attack he was trying to prevent. "He thinks she's weak," Talon muttered to the mare, his voice hard. "He thinks because she's alone she has no fangs. We'll show him." Now he had two missions: heal himself and find Clara Steele. He would be her ghost, her unseen protector. He would be the fangs she didn't know she had. Clara Steele huddled in the cold, dark root cellar, her father's old shotgun resting heavy across her knees. She had been there for 2 days, ever since Jeb Pierce and his hired thugs, Gus and Zeke, had ridden up to her homestead. "Just a neighborly visit, Miss Steele," Jeb had called out, his voice thick with false concern. He was a big man, fleshy and pale, who always seemed to be sweating, even in the cool of the morning. He owned the Bar S ranch which bordered her land, and he owned the bank in Purity Creek. In this corner of the Arizona territory, he was the law. She had met him on the porch, the shotgun held loosely in her hands. "I'm busy, Mr. Jeb." Jeb's eyes had lingered on the gun, then on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Now, Clara." "May I call you Clara?" "Your father, bless his heart, left you in a bit of a bind. That banknote is coming due, and this is no place for a delicate woman all alone." "I'm managing," she'd said, her voice as cold as ice. "Are you?" Jeb sneered, his mask of charm dropping. Gabe Stroud looked over Clara Steele's place, sneering. "Looks like Miss Steele's place could use a little tidying up. She's let things go." Clara watched helplessly as the two men, reeking of whiskey and malice, ransacked her home. They had thrown her winter flower all over the floor, shattered her mother's china, and kicked over the furniture, but they hadn't touched her. That she knew was Jeb Pierce's warning. "The next time you won't be so lucky," Jeb had called out as they rode away. "I'm a patient man, but even I have my limits." "You can pay the note, but we both know you can't," he had said with a sneer. "Or you can merge your interest with mine. A wedding would settle all debts." Clara's stomach churned. But what happened next broke her heart. Gabe, with a cruel laugh, roped her mare Sundance, who had been in the corral. "This is a fine horse, boss, or we can take her as a down payment." Sundance reared up, screaming in terror. Clara ran forward, but Zeke blocked her path, shoving her to the ground. "You stay put, little lady." But Sundance was her mother's horse, spirited and smart. As Gabe tried to drag her, the mare lunged, snapping the rope, and bolted. She cleared the corral fence and disappeared into the foothills, a flash of gold against the brown rock. "Let her go," Jeb snarled, furious. "We've made our point." Once they were gone, Clara grabbed what she could. Her canteen, a block of jerky, and her father's shotgun, and fled to the root cellar, a small dugout her father had built into the hillside. It was the only place they wouldn't think to look. Her grief was a heavy weight in her chest. Her father was dead. Her home had been violated. And Sundance, her last link to her mother, was gone. Most likely dead or taken by coyotes. She was trapped. Jeb had the paper on her land. The sheriff in Purity Creek, a man named Cole Turner, was a decent man, but he was outnumbered and likely on Jeb's payroll. She had no money, no allies, and no way out. She had to try. She waited until the sun was high on the second day, and then, disguised in her father's old hat and duster, she rode their only remaining mule, old Samson, into Purity Creek. She kept her head low, avoiding eye contact. She tied Samson outside the Tombstone office, but her real destination was the Territorial Bank. The teller, Mr. Abernathy, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Steele," he stammered. "Mr. Jeb is unavailable." "I'm not here to see Mr. Jeb," she said, her voice steely. "I'm here to ask for an extension. My father had mining claims. They're worth something." Abernathy nervously licked his lips. "Mr. Jeb filed liens on those claims, feed supplies, interest on the note, and now there's nothing left." Clara felt the floor fall out from under her. He had thought of everything. He had spun a web she couldn't escape. Defeated, she walked out into the glaring sun. She passed the general store, the place where just months ago she had felt safe. Now every eye seemed hostile, every whisper about her. Poor girl. Or just marry him. Jeb always gets what he wants. She saw Gabe and Zeke standing outside the saloon. Gabe saw her, and a slow, ugly grin spread across his face. He nudged Zeke, and they both watched her like wolves eyeing a lamb. She quickened her pace, her heart hammering in her chest. She untied Samson and was about to mount when she saw a poster nailed to the sheriff's office. Wanted. $100 reward for the capture, dead or alive, of the Apache rebel known as Talon Cross, suspected in cattle rustling and the murder of 2 prospectors in the Dragoon Mountains. Hiram Stone, chairman, Purity Creek Cattlemen's Association. Clara stared at the poster. She knew that name. Talon Cross. Not personally, but her father had spoken of him. Zane Steele had been a different kind of settler. He had traded fairly with the local Apache, the Chiricahua. He respected them. There's one, her father had said, pointing to a distant rider on a ridge months ago. They call him Talon. He's proud and dangerous, but he's an honest man, not like these liars and thieves in town. Now Jeb was hunting him. He was cleaning up the valley, eliminating anyone who might stand in his way, whether Apache or lone woman. She felt a strange kinship with the man on the poster. They were both being hunted by the same predator. She rode Samson back to the homestead, the setting sun casting long, terrifying shadows. She felt utterly, completely alone. Clara Steele barred the door of her ruined home. The root cellar felt more like a grave than a hiding place. She sat in the dark, the weight of her father's old shotgun resting heavy across her lap, waiting for the end to come. Meanwhile, Talon Cross crouched in the shadows of the livery stable in Purity Creek, the smell of hay and manure thick in his nostrils. His head and lower face were wrapped in a strip of cloth, just like a vaquero trying to keep the dust out. His wound still burned and pulled, but the cactus poultice had done its job. The infection was gone, leaving only clean, healing flesh. He had walked the long 8 miles into town, each step testing his returning strength. He had to know what Jeb Pierce was planning. He had to know if Clara was safe. The town was buzzing with the false energy of a Saturday night. Light spilled out from the saloon, mixed with the tinny clink of piano keys and the raucous laughter of drunken men. Talon slipped through the shadows, moving silently from the livery to an alley behind the general store. He was like a ghost, unseen and unheard. He found a spot behind the saloon near a broken window where he could listen in. "I'm telling you, Jeb. She's tougher than she looks," a voice slurred. Talon recognized it as Gabe Stroud's. "We tore that place apart real good, but she hasn't come crawling yet." A deeper voice, slick with confidence, replied. Jeb Stone's voice was smooth and oily. "She will, Gabe. She will. Women are like horses. You just have to find the right bridle. I've got her land, Gabe. I've got her claims. She's got to know where she stands." Jeb said, his voice laced with cold intent. Another round of crude laughter followed. Gabe grinned. "What about that Apache boss Nash Sheriff Brody was asking questions, said those prospectors didn't get killed with no arrow. Looked like a .44. Jeb's voice turned ice cold. "Sheriff Brody needs to mind his own damn business. I pay him to keep his nose out of mine. As for that Apache, he's the perfect scapegoat. We ran him good and hard a few days back. I'm sure I winged him. He's probably buzzard food by now." Jeb chuckled darkly. "And if he ain't, that wanted poster will have every bounty hunter in the territory coming after him." Talon's blood ran cold. He was the convenient story. Jeb hadn't been on a random patrol. He'd been murdering prospectors who had stumbled on his rustling and land-grabbing schemes, pinning it all on the Apache renegade. The fight hadn't been an accident. Jeb had been hunting him. Talon knew that much. "So what's the plan, boss?" Gabe asked eagerly. "Give her one more day. Sunday. Jeb chuckled darkly. A day of rest. If she's still stubborn, come Monday we'll burn her out. We'll say it was the Apache. A tragic accident. Poor Clara all alone. The men laughed again. Talon had heard enough. He slipped away, fading into the darkness. The long walk back to the canyon felt different. His pain had been replaced with a cold, white-hot rage. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He had become an instrument of vengeance. He reached the canyon just before dawn. Sundance was waiting, her golden coat almost silver in the pre-dawn light. She nickered softly, nudging his chest. He stood with her, his mind racing. He had a choice to make. He could take this magnificent horse, a horse strong enough to carry him deep into Mexico, away from the bounties, away from Jeb, away from everything. He could disappear. That would be the smart thing to do. It was the thing he had always done. His people were gone. His brother was dead. What did he owe these men, these hateful white folk who wanted him gone? Talon looked at Sundance, and then his thoughts turned to Clara. He thought of her small, kind hands. He thought of her standing up to that drunk for a stray dog. He thought of the small carved sparrow she kept in her pouch. She wasn't like them. She wasn't Jeb. She wasn't Gabe. She was different. His father had once told him, there are two kinds of men, Talon. Those who build and those who break. You must always stand with the builders. Jeb Stone was a breaker. He was breaking the land, breaking the law, and trying to break Clara Steele. Talon couldn't let that stand. He couldn't ride into Purity Creek and confront Jeb directly. He was one man, and a wanted one at that. They'd shoot him before he could get within 10 feet of town, and he couldn't just warn Clara. She wouldn't trust him. Why would she? No, he had to be smarter. He had to use Jeb's own weapons against him. Fear, superstition, and the land itself. Talon Cross had a new plan. He wasn't just going to return her horse, he was going to return her hope, and he was going to bring Jeb Pierce's damnation with him. He glanced up at the moon, a pale sliver in the sky. One more day, Jeb, you've had your time, he muttered. He began preparing. He checked the tension on his old bow, the one he'd managed to save. With practiced hands, he fletched 3 new arrows. His movements were smooth and economical. Then he sharpened his knife until the edge whispered in the dark. He wasn't just a man hiding anymore. He was a warrior preparing for battle. But his first move wouldn't be one of violence. It would be a message. He approached Sundance with a careful, measured touch. He gently combed her white silken tail using a yucca comb he'd carved from bone. He found 3 perfect strands of long white hair. With them, he braided them together with a small gray feather from a canyon wren. Then he took the small deerskin pouch tied to her saddle horn. He opened it and pulled out the tiny carved sparrow. He would go to Clara, not as a warrior, not as a man, but as a sign. He would let her know that she wasn't alone. The mountains were watching. Clara Steele hadn't slept a wink. She sat in her father's old rocking chair, the shotgun across her lap, watching the pale square of the window, waiting for the shadows to shift into the shapes of men. But the night passed uneventfully, terribly. The silence was its own kind of torture. The morning sun rose bright and cruel. She knew what it meant. It was Jeb's day of rest. Her deadline. She wouldn't go to the church. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But what else could she do? She was out of options. Her ride to Tombstone had proven that. The law was bought. The bank was owned. The town was cowed. A wild, desperate idea began to form. She could burn it all. Burn the house, the barn, the fields, everything. She could leave Jeb nothing but ashes. She could take Samson and disappear into the desert. She'd rather die on her own terms under the open sky than in Jeb's cage. As the sun climbed higher, her resolve hardened. She would do it tonight under the cover of darkness. She spent the day gathering the few things that mattered. Her mother's locket, her father's compass, a daguerreotype of them together. She packed a small bag with the last of her food. As twilight began to fall, the sky painted in hues of bruised purple and blood orange, she stepped out onto the porch for one last look. She had been born in this house. She had learned to ride on this land. And now she was going to destroy it. A tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. She turned to go back inside for the kerosene, but then she saw it. A small, strange object on the porch railing, right where her hand would fall. She touched it. It was horsehair, long, fine, and silvery white. Sundance's hair. Her heart stopped. She looked around, her eyes darting into the growing darkness. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer but the wind in the cottonwoods. She looked closer. The braid was tied with a small sinew, and tucked into it was a gray-blue feather. And beside it, her hand flew to her mouth. It was the small wooden sparrow, her sparrow, the one she had carved and kept in the pouch on her saddle. She sank to the porch step, her legs weak. This was impossible. Her saddle, her pouch, they had been with Sundance. Wherever Sundance was, this meant two things. One, Sundance was alive. Someone had her. Two, that someone had been here. Right here. On her porch while she was inside. They had come and gone like a ghost leaving behind a message. She picked up the sparrow, her fingers tracing the familiar worn shape. This wasn't a threat. Jeb and his men would have left a rattlesnake or a noose. This was something else. This was quiet, careful, personal. Who the wanted poster flashed in her mind. Talon Cross. Her father's words rang in her ears. He's an honest man. Could it be an Apache? A wanted renegade. Why would he? He had her horse. He had found Sundance. And he was watching her. Not just watching. He was protecting her. He had returned her token, her sparrow. As if to say, I have your horse. She's safe. And so are you. A new feeling bloomed in her chest. A feeling Clara Steele hadn't experienced in weeks began to blossom in her chest. It was a strange, wild, and dangerous thing. Hope. She wasn't alone anymore. The man on the wanted poster, the ghost of the dragoons, was her ally. She looked out at the darkening landscape, at the hills that had once seemed so full of menace. But now, they didn't seem empty. "Thank you," she whispered into the shadows. She went back inside, put the shotgun down, and returned the kerosene can to the shed. She wasn't burning her home. She wasn't running. She was going to fight. She didn't know how. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew. She had a guardian. An unseen force had her back. She barred the door. But this time she wasn't hiding in fear. She was waiting. She was preparing. The game had changed. Jeb Pierce thought he was playing with a lone, terrified woman. He had no idea he was playing against the mountains themselves. The night was moonless, the stars obscured by a thin veil of clouds. It was a blackness that suited Hiram Stone's purpose. "She didn't come," he growled, his voice low. He and his two men, Gabe Stroud and Zeke, sat on their horses, perched on a ridge overlooking the Steele homestead. "Stubborn to the last," Stone muttered. "So it's the fire boss?" Gabe asked, his eagerness dripping from his voice. "It's the fire," Stone confirmed. "We burned the house, the barn. We'll find her. Tragic remains in the ashes blamed on that savage Talon. Sheriff Brody will have no choice but to accept it. And the bank, my bank, will foreclose on the ashes. It's clean." "What if she's not in there?" Zeke asked, the more nervous of the two. "What if she's in that root cellar? Then we drag her out first and the house burns." After Stone replied, his voice cold, and the implication made Zeke shift uneasily. "Let's go, and this time no mistakes." They rode down, not as a posse, but as arsonists, their hooves muffled by the dusty trail. Inside the house, Clara waited. She had lit a single lamp and placed it in the window as if reading a beacon of defiance. But she was crouched in the dark shadows of the parlor, the shotgun loaded and ready. The sparrow carving was tucked into a pocket. She didn't know what a spectral ally would do, but she knew she wouldn't be a passive victim. Stone's men dismounted, their spurs jingling. "Gabe, you take the barn. Zeke, you and I will handle the house," Stone ordered. "Check the cellar first," Stone barked. Gabe, carrying the kerosene, slunk toward the barn. Stone and Zeke advanced on the house. It happened fast. As Gabe rounded the corner of the barn, something whistled in the dark. A thwack echoed, and Gabe screamed a high-pitched wail of terror. "What is it?" Stone yelled, spinning around, pulling his revolver. Gabe was pinned. An arrow fledged with dark feathers had pierced the sleeve of his duster and pinned him to the barn wall like a bug. He was unharmed, but stuck. "Apache!" Zeke shrieked, fumbling for his gun. "It's the Apache!" From the darkness on the roof of the barn, a shadow detached itself. Talon dropped, landing as silently as a mountain lion, 10 feet from Stone. He wasn't the wounded, broken man from the canyon. He was a warrior, his face streaked with black and gray, the colors of the night. He held only his long-bladed knife, but in his hand it looked deadlier than any gun. Stone stared, his face paling in the starlight, his bravado evaporating. This was no convenient story. This was a living nightmare. "You," Stone stammered. "You shot me." Talon's voice was low, cold. "You murdered the prospectors. You blamed the Apache. You blamed me." I don't know what you're talking about," Stone blustered, raising his pistol. "You are a breaker," Talon said. And then he moved. Not a charge, but a fluid, deadly sweep. Zeke, panicking, fired wildly, the bullet kicking up dirt. Talon was already on him, sweeping his leg and sending him sprawling. The gun went flying. Stone, seeing his chance, leveled his pistol not at Talon, but at the front door of the house. "Eliza, show yourself, or your ghost friend dies." The door burst open, but it wasn't Clara Steele who came out. "Drop the weapon, Hiram," Sheriff Brody called from the doorway, his own shotgun leveled at Stone's chest. Clara stood right behind him, her face pale but set in grim determination. Stone froze, his expression one of disbelief. "Brody, what? How? You got sloppy, Hiram." Brody said, his voice tired but firm. "That wanted poster. You put your own name on it. Made me wonder why. And then Miss Steele here rode into town this afternoon," he continued. "Not to the bank, but to my office. She told me everything about the threats about your offer about the poster." "She's a liar," Stone spat, his anger rising. And then Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I told him about the arrow pinning Gabe to the wall." Everyone looked at Gabe, who was still slumped against the barn wall, whimpering. "That's a neat trick," Brody said, nodding toward Talon. "This here is Talon Cross," Brody said, his eyes narrowing. "And I'm guessing he's the star witness." Stone's gaze flickered to Talon, then back to Brody. "He saw you kill those prospectors, didn't you?" "Hiram." Talon didn't speak. He just watched Stone, his black eyes promising a death that Stone's world couldn't even imagine. "It was him," Gabe shrieked from the wall. "He made me do it. He killed them. They found a gold strike on his land. He wanted it and the steel water. He shot those men and made me and Turner bury him. He shot the Apache. He said we had to clean the valley. I didn't want to, I swear." The confession hung in the air, thick with the truth that Stone had tried so hard to bury. Stone's face crumpled. He dropped his gun. "Hiram Stone," Sheriff Brody said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "You're under arrest for a whole lot of things." As Brody cuffed him, Talon moved a blur in the night. He went straight to Gabe, pulled his knife, and with a single fluid motion, sliced the sleeve off his coat, freeing the man. Gabe promptly fell to the ground and wept. Talon then retrieved his arrow, wiped it clean, and disappeared. He didn't vanish, he simply stepped back into the shadows of the cottonwoods, watching. Clara, her shotgun still in her hand, watched him go. Her heart hammered in her chest, not with fear, but with a deep, earth-shaking awe. The reign of Hiram Stone was over. The dust settled. Sheriff Brody loaded the sniveling trio, Stone, Gabe, and Zeke, into a borrowed wagon for the long ride back to Purity Creek, and from there to the territorial prison. The night of reckoning had come swift and sure. When the wagon was gone, the silence that returned to the valley was different. It was clean. Clara stood on her porch, the single lamp from the parlor casting a warm golden glow. She was exhausted, but she was alive. She was free. The banknote, the threats, they were just paper and wind, now gone with the man who'd created them. She looked out at the dark horizon. "He's still out there, isn't he?" she asked, not to anyone in particular, but to the night itself. "Yes, ma'am." Sheriff Brody's quiet voice answered from behind her. He hadn't left. He was standing by his horse, rolling a cigarette. "He helped," he said. "I can't ignore that. But I also can't ignore that poster." Clara turned to him, her voice sharp. "You know it was a lie. You heard Gabe." "I did," Brody admitted, striking a match. "But the law is a clumsy thing, Miss Steele. Stone put up that bounty. It's active. I can't take it down, not until a judge says so. He can't stay here. It ain't safe for him." "Then he's a criminal for being a victim," Clara shot back. "He's an Apache, Miss," Brody said, not unkindly. "In this territory, that's often enough. I'm going to ride back. I'd suggest you say your goodbyes, if he's still here." Sheriff Brody mounted his horse and rode off, his silhouette disappearing into the dark. Clara was alone again, but she wasn't. She walked away from the light of the house toward the corral, and there he was. Talon was not in the shadows. He was standing in the starlight, and he was not alone. He was holding the lead rope of Sundance. The mare looked at Clara, her ears pricked, and let out a soft, welcoming nicker. Eliza covered her mouth, a sob of pure joy escaping her lips. She ran not toward him, but to the horse, throwing her arms around Sundance's neck, burying her face in the white silken mane. "Oh, Sundance," she whispered, tears spilling. "I thought you were gone. I thought you were lost forever." The voice that interrupted her came from the shadows. Eliza quickly wiped her tears and turned. He stood just a few feet away. No longer the terrifying warrior. He was simply a man who looked worn, a man who, as she saw, was still in pain. "You're hurt," she said, stepping closer. "It's healing." He nodded but didn't answer immediately. "You saved her," Eliza added softly, her voice trembling. "You saved me. You saved my home." "Nash." She trailed off, but he continued, his voice deep and steady, though tinged with weariness. "Stone." "He was a breaker," Nash said, as if that explained everything. "He took what was not his. Disrespected the land. And you—" He paused, his eyes softening. "He dishonored you." She looked at him, this man, this renegade, and found something there, more honor than any man had shown her before. "My father—" She started, swallowing hard. "He spoke of you. His name was John Vance." At the mention of his name, Nash's eyes sharpened. "John Vance." His tone softened. "I knew him. He traded fair. He was a builder." Eliza's voice broke as she continued. "He said to me just before he died, if you're ever in trouble, don't trust the men in suits. Trust the mountains." Nash nodded slowly, his face full of quiet respect. "Your father was a man of true words, a good man, a man of Indibisad." A silence stretched between them, but it was no longer empty. It was full of understanding. Their two worlds, settler and Apache, had briefly crossed, united by respect and a shared enemy. Eliza spoke again, the sadness in her voice unmistakable. "You can't stay. The sheriff, the bounty." Nash nodded. "I know." He gazed at the homestead, the small house, the flowing creek. This is good land. It's peaceful. It is now, Eliza replied, her voice thick with gratitude. Thanks to you. With a reluctant sigh, Nash turned to leave, to disappear back into the mountains that had always been his true home. Wait, Eliza called out. He stopped, turning back toward her. A debt must be paid. My father taught me that. I have no money. Stone took it all, but I have this. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out her father's compass. So you can always find your way. Nash glanced at the brass object but shook his head. I do not need this. She was quiet for a moment then. Then what? What can I give you? How can I repay you? Nash hesitated, his eyes lingering on her. The woman who had shown kindness to a dog, who treasured a carved sparrow, and who stood her ground with a shotgun, stronger than he could have ever dreamed. There is nothing to repay, he said finally. But winter's coming. Your barn needs wood. Your wound needs medicine. Eliza frowned in confusion. My wound. Your house. He clarified, pointing to the shattered window. It was broken. It must be healed. Eliza looked at him, not understanding. That's not good. Nash added. The cold will come. I know, Eliza said softly, watching as he moved toward the woodpile. He wasn't leaving, not yet. He wasn't moving in either. He wasn't her man. But he was her protector, the man her father had trusted, the mountains. My name is Eliza, she said, her voice steady. I know, Nash replied, his lips curling into the faintest smile. I am Nash. He walked past her, heading for the woodpile. Picking up his axe, he swung it with purpose. The rhythmic thwack of steel hitting wood echoed in the stillness of the night. Eliza watched for a moment, then turned to Sundance. Leading the horse to the barn, she found a blanket for the animal and another for Nash, placing it on the porch. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if he would stay a day or a week, or if he would be gone by morning. But for the first time she wasn't afraid of the dark. The woman of his dreams had found her protector, and the wounded warrior had found his purpose. A debt was paid. A new future was written. Nash didn't ride away. Not yet. He stayed the guardian of the canyon, Eliza the mistress of the homestead. The line between their worlds blurred, all because of a lost horse that knew the way home. What do you think happened next? Did their silent understanding blossom into something more, or did the harsh world of the West inevitably pull them apart? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a testament to the fact that courage and kindness speak a language everyone understands. If you are moved by the story of Nash and Eliza, please hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a powerful story. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of karma, justice, and the untamed heart of the West. Thanks for listening.